hopefully you'll find out a little more about them and where they stand, and maybe I'll even entice some of you to volunteer for some of them. Again, I'd like to thank Don from Smoke and D's, who donated a portion of the cost of the meal. I'd also like to thank Bree, who did our flyer and a lot of the breath work, as well as Mr. Williamson, Michael, back there in the funny little hat. For all our work he did. Which brings us to Cindy Harner, who I'm going to introduce, the chair of Senate District 14, and she will go on.
Are we not using microphone? You don't need this. I'm Cindy Harner, chair of SD14. Thanks everybody for coming. This is a great turnout, and we really welcome everybody. For those that don't know, SD14 includes Minden Township, St. Augusta, St. Cloud, Wake Park. So if you don't know what side of 14 you're on, or if you're in 14, I have some handy maps in the back of the room for you. I also want to introduce some of our candidates. We have Aric Putnam, who is and our fabulous Dan Molgamat. Now, if you all gathered note cards to ask questions of our gubernatorial candidates, could you slide them to the end of your table and I'll walk around and pick them up? And then with that, I'm going to introduce our featured charity speaker, Peggy Ledoux. She's from the Central Minnesota Sexual Assault Center.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Can everybody hear me? No. I don't think this is working. Do I just yell? All right.
Just push the on switch.
What? 5 minutes is ticking away. So, there we go. Okay. We serve Stearns, Benton, Sherburne, and Wright counties, so it's almost 3,000 square miles. It's a really large service area. We provide services to children and adults who identify of all ethnicities, gender identities, and sexual orientation. So just to give you an idea, we are a really high volume center, one of the highest volume sexual assault centers in the state. We deal with between 400 to 500 new cases of sexual assault every 12 months. And we work with between 700 and 800 individual victims, survivors, primary and secondary victims every year. And then we also do prevention education and professional trainings in the communities we serve. We do, last 12 months, we did 250 different education sessions and reached around 8,000 people. That thing's not working. So we deal with all forms of sexual violence, child sexual abuse, when it happens to children. We also provide services to adult survivors of child sexual abuse, date and acquaintance rape, stranger assault, and also sex trafficking, which a lot of you have heard a lot about, which is pretty timely for me. I just returned from the week in New Orleans, and I'm happy to say we had a team of 15 individuals from Stearns County attending the National Conference on Sex Trafficking. So Stearns County Attorney Janelle Kendall and a couple of other prosecuting attorneys. We had law enforcement from the area. We had a physician. We had people from our center, so we had really nice representation from Stearns County. So that's one of the bigger battles that we've been dealing with lately. We are the safe harbor services provider in the 4 county areas, which means we provide services to the minors that have been sex trafficked who cannot be charged with the crime. Safe Harbor Services has been extended up to age 24. And actually, we've worked with our local professionals in the area, so when adults are picked up, they generally are not prosecuted with the crime. Even technically, they could be under the law. If they come to our group at the center, law enforcement is not putting those cases up to the prosecuting attorney's office. So that's our biggest challenge right now, is just the large numbers of sex trafficked children and adults that we are seeing in this area. St. Cloud happens to be a hub for sex trafficking. About 2 advertisements every hour, at least, that we're identifying. 2 new advertisements go up on the internet selling children for sex in the St. Cloud area. And so hopefully the team, we have a great team that we have some great ideas and came home with some new ideas. But I also want to recognize that the sex trafficking issue is kind of a popular issue right now. So if we're really going to do prevention work, we really need to address the child sexual abuse that has been happening literally for centuries. And that seems to be something that we still stay in denial about, but that's one of the huge vulnerabilities for being a victim of sex trafficking. So we need to address children now that are being sexually abused in their own homes and by people that they know. I really want to thank you. I'm sure my 5 minutes are up. We have a donation jar in the back, and there's information about our sexual assault center. Please stop by and see us. We're on Riverside Drive, northeast in St. Cloud, and we just purchased the house next door because we need additional office space. So contact us if you know people are willing to donate on that new project. So thank you very, very much.
Everybody. We're not entirely sure how the microphone situation is going to work this afternoon, so I apologize for any inconvenience in advance. And with the candidates themselves, they may choose at some point to completely abandon the microphone situation because of its lack of reliability. So please, I thank you for never mind. That's a different kind of mic drop, isn't it? I wish I would have earned it. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge, before I talk about the rules for this debate, about how wonderful this moment is. When we look at how many people are here for this debate, or this forum, it's... All right. You guys want to try this? That's the problem is me. I am the technological problem. Well, you guys can figure this out. Briefly, if I could. Just how incredibly wonderful it is to have these 5 incredibly important and interesting people here to talk with us about their plans for the state of Minnesota. And also acknowledging that this election that we're going into in 2018, and in particular this race, the incredible stakes that we are confronted with. And how lucky we are here in Central Minnesota, one, to be acknowledged as being important enough for them to be here, which is something we need to appreciate. But secondly, something else I hope we can appreciate is that right now, you all are looking at the next governor of Minnesota. We're not entirely sure which one we're looking at, but we are nevertheless looking at the next governor of Minnesota. And so I urge you, as we go through this process of this forum, to think not just about who you're going to vote for, but also who you're going to go to work for. Because of just how incredibly important this race is. Please keep that in the back of your mind as we move forward. Now, for the candidates and for the rest of us, I just want to go over the rules real quick. One, Britain right there. The mighty Britain will be our timekeeper. she will give you some kind of a hand signal when you get to 1 minute. Hopefully this finger. Depending on what you're doing. So give me one finger when you get to 1 minute. She will give you a different signal when you get to 15 seconds. And when you get to 2 minutes, we're supposed to be done. We're doing 2-minute answers to the questions, 1 minute opening statements, and 1 minute closing statements. That's how we will proceed. And we'll get to as many questions as we possibly can. The questions that have come to us, we've got some questions that were submitted before the forum, and we have some questions that were submitted today. I am going to choose those as we go through. The order of speaking will be decided thusly, just so everyone knows. This is a virtual dice. And we'll pretend it's because, we're technologically hip because we're Democrats and not because Eric forgot to die. So I'm going to roll it once, and that will be the first person to speak. From that point on, we will move to the right with each. Let's move to the left. Can we move to the left instead? Ask us all to move to the left. So I'm going to roll the die once. That will tell us who will start off. And then the next question will go to the person to that candidate's immediate left until all 5 have answered the question. Is everyone clear about the rules and what we're doing? We good? A question?
Are you going to be one of the governors?
No. Thank you for the question. All right, so moving from right to left, Tim will be 1, and then Chris will be 5.
What if it's a 6?
Then I guess this one over there is going to be our new candidate. Not Kevin. Kevin's like me? No, the young guy. Ready, Britt? You watching this? 3. So Erin will be starting us off, and then Congressman Walz will go next. Our first question. Our understanding is that all of you are for universal health care now. Oh, sorry. Oh, I totally screwed that up. Sorry. Please, opening statements.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you, everybody, for being here. My name is Erin Murphy. I am a registered nurse and a teacher. I'm a mom and a state legislator, and I'm running for governor. And I'm running for governor because I believe in a kind of politics that improves people's lives. And when we do that together, we can make a bright future for everybody in the state of Minnesota. I want to do that with you. I ran for office after I took care of my mom at the end of her life, and she had to fight for health care and fight for care even though she had good coverage. For the last 11 years, I have served in the Minnesota House. I've spent my time all over the state of Minnesota, and Minnesotans have been my very best teachers. I have a lot of faith in us. I believe in our capacity to solve the tough problems that we face, but it requires that we put us back in our politics again. That's what I have practiced for all of my years in office and before that. I'd like to be your next governor. I hope to earn your support. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Eric, Luke, and Cindy, and to all of you, thank you. This is the antidote to turning on the news, coming and organizing and having an aspiration about what our future can be. Also, thank you for serving dinner at this. I supervised the high school lunchroom for 20 years. It's when I'm most comfortable talking to people when they eat. So, I'm Tim Walz. I'm a high school teacher at Mankato West High School, football coach, prom builder. I am a retired soldier, 24 years in the Army and the Army National Guard. I'm a husband to Gwen, and I'm dad to Hope and Gus, 16 and 11. I also have had the privilege of representing Southern Minnesota in Congress, the second Democrat in 125 years to do that. I've led on rural issues and written 2 farm bills. I've been a leading voice on veterans and national security issues, but more importantly, I've been deemed by my colleagues to be one of the most effective members there, finding solutions, counterintuitive coalitions. I'm running for governor because I don't believe this state is fractured to where we can't find solutions. I don't believe that there's not a common interest. I believe in the people of Minnesota, and I believe with the right leadership, there's nothing we can't accomplish. Thank you for being here.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chris Coleman. I'm the mayor of St. Paul, and I'm running for governor. I'd love to have your support. I'm running for governor because I'm passionate about the state of Minnesota. I am passionate about what we have built up over generations of people that had a progressive vision for this state and for the people of the state of Minnesota. But I know that what we have built up over generations can be torn down in a matter of weeks or months during a legislative session if the Republicans control not only both legislative bodies but the governor's office. We have to win this seat. We have to hold on to the governor's office, and we need to govern with our progressive values. For 12 years, I've had the honor and privilege of being the mayor of the city of St. Paul, and we have changed the direction of that city. But we have done that by being true to our values, by governing with DFL principles, by bringing people to the table, fighting for equity, fighting for education for all, fighting for great transportation networks, fighting for jobs. That is the fight that we have to take across the state of Minnesota to all 860 cities, large and small, that call Minnesota home. I want to fight for our families across the state of Minnesota. I've done it as mayor, and I'm going to continue to do it as your next governor. Thank you so much.
All right, let's see. Does this work? No. Okay. Answer. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tina Liebling. I'm a state representative from Rochester. I'm in my 7th term in the Minnesota House of Representatives. I first ran in 2002 when Senator Wellstone was running his last race, and I had the honor of watching him closely, and I've modeled my political career after his. There are 2 things that he was really all about. One is he was never for the big shots and the insiders. He was always for the ordinary person, not the people who had lobbyists and could hire lawyers to represent them, but the ordinary people of Minnesota, the people I call the heroes of Minnesota, the people who get up every day and do what they have to do. So I'm running because, as Bernie Sanders told us, the economy is rigged, and I am somebody from the Bernie Sanders side of things, and I believe we have to talk about what's really happening in our economy. Secondly, I can't be bullied or intimidated. We need somebody in the governor's office who's going to stand firm, who doesn't put their finger in the wind to find out what their positions should be. That's why I'm running. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I'm Paul Thissen. Sorry I was late. I just flew in. It was my daughter's parents' weekend. She's a freshman in college that I didn't want to miss. But I also didn't want to miss this, so I'm glad that I made it. So I am running for governor because I think that the fundamental issue that we face and that our party has always stood for, but we haven't stood for strong enough in recent years, is basic economic security for Minnesota families. Minnesota families should have peace of mind that when they go to bed at night, their kids are going to get a good education, that they're going to have someone to take care of their kids if they need child care, that they're going to have health care when they need it, that they're going to have a secure retirement. That's what we ought to be talking to Minnesotans about. We haven't been doing that good a job of it. When I was Speaker of the House and all through my legislative career, I've been in the legislature 15 years, those are the things I've been fighting for, but not just fighting for, actually delivering. We can talk all we want about great things in Minnesota, but if you don't deliver, it doesn't matter at all. And that's what my political career has been about, my public service is about, and that's what I want to do as your next governor. We need a governor that's going to deliver for everyday Minnesotans, and I think I can do that. Thanks.
Now to our first question. 2 weeks ago at our biannual Wellstone dinner, DFL Attorney General candidate Brian Winkler summarized wealth inequality and how it has impacted Minnesota's families. What have each of you done and what will you do to bring to the attention of Minnesotans the issue of wealth inequality? The first answer for this round would be Tim Walz, please.
Yeah, first of all, when I first got to Congress in 2007, I voted to raise the minimum wage. Well, that is the floor that we're looking at. The idea of a minimum wage being frozen and the idea of working families working 40-plus hours a week and not being able to afford the basics of either housing, health care, or food, all of us here fight deeply about that. I think the biggest issue in Congress and as your governor, I think we all understand what's at stake in this election. One of the first things they will come for, should we not win this election, is they will make Minnesota a right-to-work state. We all know as middle class it has been our right to organize and it has been our collectively right to organize through organized labor to be able to build living wages, to make sure that we're there with a secure retirement, to make sure we're there to improve our workplaces. As a member, as a union member and a union teacher up here, I understand the importance of what that brings. I think being able to create an economy that's focused on those good-paying jobs, that's focused on the value of labor and the dignity of labor, is something we do here in Minnesota. We also do that by making sure that we are a state, and I think we as a party need to make sure we are the party of growth. We are the party of business. When my colleagues tell me who they are, when they say they're pro-business, I believe them. The problem is in Congress, it's usually one business. That's usually petrochemical or whatever it might be. What we need to make sure is that we're incentivizing the broad growth through renewable energy we see in southern Minnesota. Those are jobs. That's not just about reducing carbon emissions and the existential threat of climate change. Those are good paying jobs. They're union jobs. We've got union electricians building wind towers. We in Minnesota continue on the path that we've always said of making sure that we make sure that our energy needs are coming from renewable energies. We make sure that the jobs that we're incentivizing are good paying jobs. We make sure we protect that right to collectively bargain, and we make sure we take the message of the value of labor and the value of earning a living to people so that our neighbors buy into this.
I think too often people think of poverty and they think of the inner city neighborhoods in St. Paul or Minneapolis. But poverty is an issue across the state of Minnesota. 600,000 Minnesotans living in poverty right now, and too many of those are children. And we need to do everything that we can to equalize the playing field so that people have a pathway out of poverty, people have a pathway into the middle class, people have a pathway into a successful career. And I think it does begin with support for union membership. If you look at the expansion of the inequality of this country, it is directly correlated to the demise and the decline of union membership. So as CEOs have continued to increase their salaries, it used to be 8 or 9 times the salary of the average worker. Now it's 250 times the salary of the average worker, and that divide continues to be exacerbated. And quite frankly, it's not sustainable. This country is built on the fact that we had a healthy middle class, that we had pathways out of poverty, and that we had opportunities for our families that they're no longer seeing. So we need to make sure that every child has the education that they need. They need to go into school prepared and ready to learn. They need to be able to graduate from school on time, go into post-secondary options in school so that they can reduce the cost of college, so that they don't come out of college so burdened by debt that they can never see past that. We need to continue to help people into pathways of great career trades. If you go to St. Paul Technical College, they have incredible programs that are teaching people to be plumbers and electricians and carpenters, and those are good paying jobs. You come out of those programs and you can step immediately into a job that pays $20, $25 an hour with benefits, with health care and beyond. Those are great pathways for poverty, but we have to start by repealing the tax cuts that the Republicans in the state legislature gave last year to the wealthiest Minnesotans and start returning that money to the people that need it in the state.
I'm going to ask us all to withhold our applause if we could, please, to expedite our process through, so that we have opportunities for more and more questions.
I think you should get these three, though.
Yeah, get those three. That's Representative Liebling.
All right, well, good, because I feel so bad if I didn't get the applause. Wow. So this is the very reason that I'm running. This is the real factor that's happening in our economy. The economy really is rigged because almost all of the wealth is going to the top, and ordinary people are struggling. So I heard on the radio the other day, somebody did a survey of what people are afraid of, and one of the big things people are afraid of, corrupt politicians. Do you believe it? Well, I'm afraid of corrupt politicians too, honestly, and I bet you are too. And so part of the problem we have as Democrats is that we do talk about things for people and that work for the ordinary people and so on. We all do. We always have talked about that. But sometimes we get into power and then we don't show it. And then we do things like fund stadiums for billionaires and give them sweet deals and give corporations great, tax benefits and things like that. And then people don't know who to believe. They don't know because the Republicans talk the same way we do. And we just heard that at another forum last night with Kurt Downey, who's also running on the Republican ticket. They say they're for people too, and they say what we have to do is cut government. But no, I think what we need to do is stand up for ordinary people, not just bring their voices to the Capitol, but that has to be central to what we do in our government here in Minnesota. Government has to level the playing field. And every policy that we do has to be with ordinary people in mind. The people who get up every day and work hard to try to improve their lives, improve their kids' lives. And sometimes they're struggling to find a job because they have some barriers to overcome. Those are the people we have to be fighting for each and every day. And I have some specific policies. I don't think I'm going to have time to do it, but right, one of them is 2 years free tuition post-high school. Free college tuition or technical education. I think this would be an enormous boost for Minnesota. We could do it and would help ordinary folks get ahead. Thank you.
All right, I will stand up, I guess. Ryan did an amazing job at the Wellstone dinner talking about the story of what's gone on in America since 1970 and how the productivity has increased dramatically, that we all do, but the wages haven't kept. And that is at the heart of this. The thing I guess I would say, first of all, is that I know we can solve many of these problems and we can start to shrink some of this inequality and adopt some of these policies, because I've done it. I've been there and done it. We raised the minimum wage. We passed Women's Economic Security Act to get to more equal pay for equal work for women. We made sure that we expanded the biggest public option we could under the ACA at the time to get as many people, hundreds of thousands of Minnesotans coverage. We need to do more than all that. We passed the biggest expansion of labor rights in a generation when I was Speaker of the House. For those home care workers who are doing incredibly hard work that every single one of us needs, it's an issue of justice that we do all these things. But I've been there and I've done it, and I know I can do it again as your governor. But there's a couple of other things that we really need to think about as we do this. First of all, we need to get after racial inequality in the state, because one of the reasons we have this inequality is because there is embedded racism in many of our institutions. And we have to go against that very aggressively and make it a central focus on every bill we look at. Is it going to grow or shrink those economic and racial opportunity gaps that exist in this state? A second thing we have to do is make sure that we're keeping more and more wealth in our communities. The best example of this, Leech Lake Reservation, $70 million spent on health care for their members. Not a single dollar of that money stays in their community because the hospital is owned by Sanford Health, because the clinics and the home care agencies are owned by private entities. We got to switch that, and as a state, we can do that. We need to take on consolidation of healthcare and many, many industries. The state can address the competition to create more competition so those big companies don't dominate more and more. The state of Minnesota can do that. And the last thing is, we have to understand that at the end of the day, this is about power. And we need to stand up against power if we are going to take this on. Thank you so much.
My dad built cars for a living at the GM plant in Janesville, Wisconsin. And as a young person, I remember every time they went on strike. I knew when we went on strike because we drank powdered milk. We had canned chicken that my mom served over biscuits, and it was delicious, but it's the only time we ever ate it. And we had side pork from my uncle's farm, which I didn't like very much. But every time they went on strike, they earned a little more for the people who worked and built cars for a living. That was the power of standing together. That was the power of the UAW. And it is why today my dad has good health care coverage and a decent pension, and he can support himself because of that work. I grew up in that family. I went to work for the Minnesota Nurses Association for the very same reason, because it's important for nurses to stand together, to make sure that we are using our voices together, not only to make sure we earn a good living wage, but so we can stand up for our patients as advocates, unfettered from the pressure that we might get from an employer. It's important from my perspective. Corporations are holding a lot of power. The powerful are holding a lot of power. We have done work. I have done work in the legislature on expanding organizing rights, raising the minimum wage, the Women's Economic Security Act, and by campaigning all over the state of Minnesota. I believe the antidote to power in our politics is making sure we're back in our politics again. We are at the doors with our candidates again, and we are on the ground talking with one another about our politics again. We will not tackle the power that's held by too few people if we're not back in this story again. As the governor of the state of Minnesota, I will continue to work with the people of Minnesota. I will continue to expand organizing rights to make sure that people have the benefit of a union. Let's remember the building blocks for our families: a good job, health care, great education, and a safe place to live. Those should be our focus. That is the bread and butter for Democrats and the DFL party, and as your governor, I will focus on those things to make sure that everyone's got a shot at opportunity.
Now, just a quick reminder, the applause, cut it out. Now, a number of you actually have submitted questions, so I apologize if the wording of this is imprecise, and so accordingly, I think we should allow our candidates to interpret the question with some freedom. But I've received 5 questions now since this began about mining in the boundary waters. So the question that I'm going to read, which is just one of the several that we received, is, do you support mining by the boundary waters? And our first person answering this question is Mayor Paul.
All right, so no clapping, and we're standing. I think the ground rules are evolving as we go along. And I'm so glad I got the first one to opportunity to answer probably what is the third rail of politics right now in Minnesota. And let me start off by saying that we as Democrats need to figure out how to talk about this. Because if we're going to stand in a circular firing squad, and if the people that support the boundary waters and love the boundary waters like I do, and the people that have depended upon mining for generations are going to stand and shoot at each other, we will lose this race. And we need to figure out how we can both have good jobs on the Iron Range and a pristine wilderness in the boundary waters. Connie and I, our first kind of point of common interest, I was a law student. Do you know how hard it is for someone to fall in love with a law student? Very difficult. But she found out that I love the boundary waters, and she said, well, maybe I'll give them a pass. But the fact of the matter is, Minnesota is a mineral-based economy. We are a resource-based economy, whether it's farming, whether it's timber, or whether it's mining, and we have been, and we will be, and we will continue to be that. And I believe that we have to let science lead the way. We have to let science answer the question, can we both do mining and do it in a way that protects the boundary waters? And what is a very, very complicated question has a very simple answer. If we can protect the boundary waters, then we should do it. We should do it because the greatest single threat to the environment right now is climate change. And the minerals that we can potentially mine up in northern Minnesota are essential to going to a carbon-free economy. They're essential for us to be able to do solar and to do wind. If you want a Tesla battery, if you want a cell phone, all of those are things that can come out of the boundary water, or the mineral deposits up in northern Minnesota. Yes, we have to protect the boundary waters, but we owe it to generations of miners and the people that depend upon those jobs to let the science show whether we can do it safely. And if we can, we do. If we can't, we don't.
So I feel from what I've learned about the copper sulfide mining, and it's not just the boundary waters, you know, there are 2 different potential operations that we've been talking about. One would affect the boundary waters, the other would affect the, like, Duluth watershed. I am not convinced that it can be done safely, so I do not think at this time that we should be allowing that mining to go forward. But I think that where we as Democrats tend to allow ourselves to be divided is when we fail to really recognize the centrality of people's desire to have a job that is a job you can have without a lot of education, that it's a career job, that you can earn a good wage, and that there's security there. But what I've said to people in that area and in other places is that this is the same thing everybody wants, and it's disappearing for lots and lots of people. So I think we should be careful that we don't look down on each other. I've talking to some people up on the range. They were like, "Oh, we don't want to do tourism." Well, tourism is also an honorable job. Work is honorable, and but I think that it's very hard because jobs are leaving our country. We have fewer manufacturing jobs. Our future looks a lot different, and we have to really, kind of put our arms around each other and recognize that there's grief and difficulty in the changes that are happening for all of us. But no, right now I do not think that we should solve that by endangering our precious resources up in the Northland.
Thissen.
Well, thank you. Minnesota, everybody across the state, miners, farmers, people in the metro area, even lawyers, and when your wife and you are both lawyers, you can fall in love that way. So maybe we can do that. But we all value water, and we have high standards to protect our water. That's the bottom line, and we need to do that. But if the experts that are doing this, through the permitting process, which looks at the financial assurance, making sure there's enough money there to take care of it, and looking at our water and other standards, if we can meet those standards, this project should go ahead and the governor shouldn't stand in the way of it. But we need to think of 3 other really important things. First, we have not done as good a job as we should about enforcing our water standards in other areas is enforced. In this case, we have the greatest detail because we need to make sure that this works if it goes forward. Secondly, we should not be circumventing the process. We should make sure the process plays itself out, and I oppose any attempts and any efforts to make that process get shortened so that we're not actually understanding what's going to go on. And the third thing, and this is maybe the most important thing in my mind, if we do this project, we need to make very, very sure that the wealth that is Minnesota's wealth, these minerals that are coming out of these mines, that wealth as much as possible stays here in Minnesota. These are Canadian, Swiss, Argentine companies. We do not want all of the profits of this wealth that belongs to Minnesotans flowing to those companies. We need to change our tax policy, and we need to take other policy steps to make sure that when that mine closes down, the wealth is still here, reinvested in our communities, especially in northern Minnesota, so that they can go forward and continue to move ahead. And the last thing is we should not, as Tina said, look down on these jobs. A job of 30 years is a job that you can get married with, you can have kids with, you can graduate those kids, have them get married, get grandkids. Those jobs are careers. They're here for a lifetime, and we should not look down on those jobs.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you. I think it's important to remember that we're talking about our water, our jobs, and our future. And we have to remember as we talk about this issue, and people are talking about this all across the state, that it is our future and our water and our jobs together as Minnesotans. And we should center ourselves there. And I was the first to get into this race last November. It's been almost a year for me. And the first house parties that we did, one in Virginia, Minnesota, and one in Duluth, and of course we got these questions right away. And it is a hot and divisive issue, which is why I think it's important that we hold ourselves together around it. I believe this. I believe that as your governor, it is my job to follow the law and follow it vigorously. A company pursuing that ability to mine has got to follow our strong permitting process, and if they get through that with approval, they should be allowed to proceed. We must ask for and demand strong financial assurances from that entity to make sure that Minnesota's interests are protected. We should invest more in the Natural Resources and Research Institute because they are already using applied science to develop solutions to make sure we can protect that strategic asset of water. It is our strategic asset, and it is not just mining or the potential of mining that could impair it. We see agriculture and its impact on water, development and its impact on water, the concentration of people living in the metro area and its impact on water. We need to protect our water. It's not just a question for the range. It's not just a question for the hardworking people that have culturally worked in the mines for a long time. And I've spent time with them. I've toured the Polymet mine. I understand the cultural significance of that. Together, though, we must fight for our clean water, good jobs for Minnesotans, and our future together. Thank you.
Councilman Walz.
What we're doing today, this is a job interview for arguably one of the most important jobs in the state, and it takes leadership is a piece of this. It's why I've looked at this issue for years. I've walked the land swap pieces. I've been there. And in July, when I wrote the op-ed, saying and stating clearly where the science was, where the process was, and making sure that we're there to support a mineral-based economy when it makes sense we can protect the land. I clearly spelled that out. I put it in the paper, and the Mesabi paper said, this is how all candidates should act. Tell people where to lead and start bringing people together. This idea of false choices in our economy is killing us. The idea in southern Minnesota that you can't have clean water and agriculture pits us one against the other. I'm proud that I've had the support of the corn growers. Every time I've run for Congress, I've also had the Sierra Club. It's not pitting neighbor against neighbor. It's this idea that if we can do this, we should be talking to people, we should be leading, and we should be having this conversation in a manner that what is our long-range vision. I agree with Paul on the idea of wealth. The biggest risk is taken in the extraction of the minerals themselves. The best economic value added comes with processing those minerals. We know that this copper is needed in a clean energy economy to combat global climate change that is an existential threat. But why are we shipping the copper out when we should be building the cars here that are renewables? Why should we not be thinking long-term? So as a role of governor, it's about building coalitions. It's not about dividing. So if you're supporting, the answer is yes. If the science is there and I have voted to make sure this process moves forward, not short-circuiting anything, it's not because I don't care deeply. The boundary waters was always important to my family. Last June it became sacred to us because of my brother's death in the boundary waters. Those are things that all of us care and share about, but as your governor, there's a responsibility to not follow on these things, but set the tone, lead, and build the coalitions to make sure the best interest of all Minnesotans is first.
Next question. Our understanding is that all of you are for universal health care now. Please explain the development of your thoughts on universal health care, the solution you advocate, and the political work you intend to do to achieve it. The first person for this question is Representative Liebling. Oh, did you?
Okay. Well, very good. Well, I love talking about this topic. I've been an advocate for single-payer health care for a very long time. I can't even remember when I started to be for single-payer health care, but it was well before we implemented the Affordable Care Act. And when that came along, of course, we were actually, the Republicans were in the majority in the House when it first passed, and then they did nothing with it, and then we had to implement it when Democrats were in charge of the House, Senate, and Governor's office. But even at that time, I said, this is good, it moves us forward, but it's not going to really solve the problem because it still puts insurance, it still puts somebody between patients and their providers. So this is something that I think Minnesota can really lead on. The slogan of my campaign is Believe in Minnesota. We can do a lot of these things. Of course, right now the Republicans have dragged us really pretty far in the wrong direction on this, and we don't have time to go into that right now, but I believe we have to be very strong and let Minnesotans know what we can do, that they don't have to worry about being able to pay out of their pocket when they make a decision to go to the doctor to find out if they're really sick or if it's something that'll pass, because they're worried that they won't be able to afford the visit even though they have insurance. This is wrong. We can do better than this. We all need insurance. We all need health care, not insurance. We gotta stop talking about insurance. It's about health care, and it should stop being about money, and I think we can get there in our state. And there are ways that we can start to do this. One is we've got to get the nonprofit HMOs out of our public programs. They are wasting a lot of our money. Now they're actually stealing our money and sending it off to private for-profit corporations. We need to get our arms around this.
Well, I do support Medicare for all, and I think we need to get there in this state, and that we can get there. Really comes down to basic value proposition for me. You know, I know that I'm fortunately pretty healthy today, but I know someday I'm going to be sick. I know there's people that are sick today that I should be willing to pay a little bit more to take care of, because I know when I get sick, whatever that is, there'll be people there to take care of me. That's the basic values that we ought to be talking about this healthcare issue around, and what that says is single payer or Medicare for all. We should be willing to take care of each other and spread the risk of the thing we all inevitably know is going to be there, which is that we're going to need a doctor or a nurse someday. This is also the fundamental issue of economic security as I go around the state. The thing that most keeps people up at night, the thing that people are losing their peace of mind over, is the future of their health care. And some of it is the craziness in Washington, D.C., but some of it is what they see in front of them every single night and every single day, their risk that they're not going to have that health care. So we need to get to that. But I also think it's really important that we don't lose sight of the fact that it's not just about getting health care to people. We need to continue to take care of the cost, the growing cost of health care in this country, because we can sustain that curve into the future. Getting insurance companies out of the way, that'll take care of part of it, but it's not going to be the only thing. Public health investment is critically, critically important, because that can keep all of us healthy, and we've made some good strides there. We need to do more. Investment in research and development to get the right kind of things in place. We need to take on the prescription drug companies that are gouging people all across the state, and there's things that the state of Minnesota can do to enforce that. We need to also look at the consolidation that's going on in healthcare right now, especially in rural healthcare, and make sure people understand that it may cost a little more to make sure that there's good access all across the state of Minnesota, but we should be willing to invest that additional money to make sure that wherever you live, you can see a doctor or nurse. And then we need to let our providers lead the way. They're doing some amazing stuff around coordinating mental health and coordinating basic healthcare, coordinating with social services. We need to do a lot more of that. We can lead the way, and we will in Minnesota.
I hadn't seen that one yet. Well, seriously, stop.
Oh. All right.
So I'm a single payer supporter, and I believe we should have health care that we can count on, especially when we're sick. This is an area that I've spent the last 25 years of my career working on, first as a registered nurse and then with the Minnesota Nurses Association. My very first job with the nurses was organizing nurses support for the passage of Minnesota Care. 25 years ago, we led the nation. We led the nation when we adopted that policy that said if you work for a living but don't have access to health care, you should. And we should lead the nation again, just like that, and show America that we can provide health care for everyone. Health care you can count on. I'm a single payer supporter. And my dad had a stroke right before Labor Day. He just moved into memory care. When I went down and spent that week with him after he had his stroke, one time a nurse came and talked to me about clinical factors that would move my dad from the intensive care unit to the next place where he got his care. Every other time, the person who came to talk to me and my family about my dad's care talked about what kind of insurance he had. What kind of insurance you have should not drive the kind of care that you get, and that's what's wrong with our system right now. I support opening Minnesota Care to anyone who wants in the state of Minnesota, and I think it is time for us to move the health plans out of that and contract directly with providers, with hospitals, with nurses and doctors, the people who know how to deliver care. And we should invest more in primary care because we know with that investment in primary care, we're going to get a better value for our dollar. Minnesota has led on this for years and years, and we have been polarized in a debate since the passage of the Affordable Care Act. It is time for us to lead again so that Minnesotans have the peace of mind of health care they can count on. I have the experience, the head, and the heart to get this done with you for the people of Minnesota.
Well, this is an issue all of us, it is so personal. Each of us has a story. I watched my dad dying when I'm young of lung cancer and watched decisions being made that forced my mother to go back to work and delay retirement for almost 20 years because of decisions were made on end-of-life directives and those types of things. I ran in 2006 on the very premise that healthcare was a basic human right. That class of 2006 that was elected in the House of Representatives, we have had the House of Representatives of Democrats for 4 years in the last 25 years. It was that election that allowed us to move the ACA. I'm proud to have supported that. I'm proud to have voted 71 times to protect. I'm proud of the millions of people that we added onto it. But we knew at the time, healthcare is a journey, not a destination. But what we did do with that vote was we cemented into the American people's minds that healthcare is a basic human right, that pre-existing conditions must be dealt with. So I, like all of you, we need to move to a system that every single person is covered in affordable healthcare. We need to make sure that they have access in rural areas to healthcare. It's an area where I have spent a lot of time in Congress on rural healthcare, especially dealing with veterans and veterans' mental health care. So as we think about this, how do we structure this? How do we make the case? And every one of these people is exactly right. We have spent 7 years talking about insurance reform. Single payer is still insurance reform. Let's get to the place where we start moving our place to talking about those things of WellCare. I am glad that I fought and led the charge, not jokingly, about the lunchroom, healthy student lunches. We can't have a 30% juvenile obesity rates or diabetes and expect to get at this. And there's research right here in this state where we have a combination between the University of Minnesota and some of our great medical institutions along with the private sector. If government will lead to start moving us forward to reducing those front-end costs you heard from Paul, to getting everyone in, I think Erin is exactly right. The Minnesota Care buy-in is one that's there, because I tell you this, it's good to be aspirational. They are going to kill the children's health insurance policy in D.C. on Thursday. Keep our eyes on people's lives now as we plan for the future.
Well, this issue has become kind of acutely personal when I realized, as I have a couple of months left as mayor of the city of St. Paul, and then I'll be terribly unemployed starting January 2nd. And I found out what it would cost me to continue my health care coverage for my wife and my child, who's 23 years old. It will cost me $2,400 a month. A month. It is frightening to think about that. And I am a middle-class family. My wife has got a good job. I had one up until January. But the fact of the matter is, we have to have some basic principles around this. Tim is right. This is a basic human right. It has to be universal. Healthcare has to be comprehensive, and it has to be affordable to all. We can't have families going bankrupt trying to pay for it. And more importantly, we can't have families going bankrupt because they have unpaid medical bills. And we certainly can't have children that are dying because they didn't have basic procedures that could have saved their lives. We've all heard the story of the young man who had an abscessed tooth and didn't have the ability to go in and spend the $80 or $90 that would have actually have taken care of that. And they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to save his life, and were unsuccessful. This is crazy. Every other country, every other industrialized country has universal health care coverage. We can do this. You know, whether we can get to single payer right away, I'm not sure about that. Other states have tried. California's tried. They didn't do it. Vermont's tried. But we do have to build the infrastructure up. And we do have to start expanding eligibility for Medicare and for Medicaid. And we need to fight back on the craziness that Tim just outlined in Washington, D.C. It isn't just about what they might pass in Congress. The president is systematically destroying the benefits of the Affordable Care Act. And we don't even see what's happening here, but he is making that system collapse. It was a system that could work with a few tweaks. We need to get back to that kind of idea, and I think we can do that. You can't give me a seriously stop. That was like 2 seconds after stop.
I'm going to earn one next time.
Now we're getting into it. So Representative, you're first on this next one, just for clarification's sake. The question is, how do we make sure that schools in greater or outstate Minnesota are funded fairly relative to schools in the metro, and ensure that outstate students have access to the same opportunities as students in the state?
Well, this is a very good question. The first is we need to fund our schools better for everybody. You know, when I came in the legislature in 2002, if you compare kind of the real dollar amount of money that we're spending on schools compared to today, it's down about 10%. No wonder schools are feeling the squeeze. So we need to make sure that we actually get that up to at least where we were at the beginning of this century, and that would make a big difference. The second thing is, though, that we have to understand that there are differences, that areas that are more remote actually cost more money in some ways. And if we want to preserve those places, which we do, we need to stand up and understand that that's the case. When I was Speaker of the House, I worked with a guy named Representative Paul Marquardt out of Moorhead, who was the chair of our Education Committee. And in that year, what had been happening for the last decade as we went through budget deficit after budget deficit under Governor Plenty is the gap between small rural schools and metro suburban schools kept growing and growing and growing. We closed that gap by 33% in one single biennium because we looked at the levy and made sure that the state was putting more money in to make it equitable across the state. That's what the Minnesota Miracle was about back in 1970, almost 50 years ago, 1971. We need to get back to that principle, that it doesn't matter that you're taking care of the kids in your own community, you also have to take care of the kids down the road. And I'm going to be a governor that focuses in on that. The other thing, though, that we really have to do as we think about this issue, it's not just about more money, it's not just about making sure we close the gap. We need to invest in broadband across this state, because one of the great inequities, not just between metro and rural, but between students in a rural district and other students in that district, is that they don't have access to broadband to do their homework at home. We passed the broadband grant program in 2014. That is going to make a difference for communities all across the state, but we have to put a lot more money in it to make sure that the technology is there that you need to educate kids today.
All across the state of Minnesota, people support education, from early learning all the way through higher education. It is a value statement for us. It's a value statement for me. And when I'm your governor, we are going to continue to invest in strong public schools. It is important to recognize the place that a school holds in a community. It's important for our kids and our kids' education. But people aren't going to move to a community if they don't have confidence in the school. And we want to make sure, I want to make sure that schools across the state of Minnesota Whether you're going to school in Cleveland or Elbow Lake or in Cook or in St. Paul and Eden Prairie, wherever your kids are going to school, they're getting a high quality education. It is our job in our Constitution that our children get a strong public education in the state of Minnesota, and we have fallen behind in terms of funding. It is time for us to catch up with that funding to make sure that local leaders have the ability to provide the education that they know they need to do for their kids and their communities. I have confidence that we can do that. I spent some time in Elbow Lake a couple of years ago and met with the woman who runs Head Start in Elbow Lake. In their community, they decided that they were going to move funding from Head Start to Early Head Start because they had kids coming to school not ready to learn. And then they were going to work together to make sure they were investing in school-based pre-K. We know from the research that investment in early learning is the best way to close the opportunity gap, the achievement gap, and making sure that all our kids, regardless of from where they have come to school ready to learn. And I watched the folks in Elbow Lake make that decision and move in that direction because they heard from the parents in that community that that's what they were looking for. That kind of cooperation that happens in local units and local communities is what we need to respond to together, publicly, and I will do that as our governor to make sure that every kid has an awesome education across the state of Minnesota.
Well, I am a public school teacher from Greater Minnesota, and I watch this happen all the time. First and foremost is we have to have the ability as a state to attract and retain the best quality teachers. We want folks to see us as a beacon of a place that values education across this state, that values education for the basic principle of opportunity it gives to each individual. But I think something we've been missing, and you see this, everybody's been reading Listen Liberal or Hillbilly Elegy and trying to understand what's happening in rural America. Republicans wiped us out in the State House and the State Senate in Minnesota by promising what they were going to do for these rural communities. Well, everybody in this room knows that was pretty much nothing. They didn't deliver that. We're still at the gap in broadband. But I think the mistake we're going to make, and what I will do as governor is making sure the case, this isn't just Greater Minnesota's problem, this is all of Minnesota's problem. And when we talk about opportunity gaps amongst children of color, as long as we continue to talk about an opportunity gap of children of color, that's somebody else's problem. It's an opportunity gap for all of Minnesota. So this issue of making our greater Minnesota, it's about training that workforce that's going to need to be out there. It's creative programs that we need to finance, like Welding Academy at Fairmont, that is a cooperation with McNeely Steel. We had 7 kids graduate from that program this year. They're going to start out with no student debt, working for over $50,000 a year, doing the noble trade of building things that build America. That's the type of way that we invest. But I want to applaud the legislators who are up here, making and taking off this idea of pitting our ag land people in our rural communities against their local schools, because the tax base is mostly in ag land, was a recipe for disaster. These people care about their local schools, but farmers ask, why should we pay 60% of it? Because we're capital poor and land rich. So starting to find some of those equities, starting to understand what Paul said, remote areas take a little more, but starting to make the case to people, these are not spending to keep remote schools open in communities just because they want to have a school. It's about building a one Minnesotan economy that creates that Minnesota miracle, because equity of opportunity creates equity of jobs that can be grown, and people will locate here for our work ethic, for our well-trained workforce, for our good infrastructure. And I'm just talking now to get that last one. Seriously, stop. You were going for it. I saw her reaching for it.
You're kind of power hungry over there. So has anybody been to Hibbing High School? Okay, if you haven't been there, there's 2 reasons why you should go. First of all, because it's where Bob Dylan first got up on the stage and performed when he was Bobby Zimmerman. It's pretty cool to be there. But the second thing is, that was at a time where Minnesotans put their money where their mouth was. They didn't just say that education was the most important thing, they delivered on that. And they created palaces to education. And they even brought in college professors to teach on the high school level, because they understood that the most important thing that they could give their children was the best education possible. And that was, I think, the most fundamental principle about in Minnesota for many, many years. And that idea that happened when my dad was the majority leader of the Minnesota State Senate, when the Minnesota Miracle was passed, it was about making sure we equalized the playing field across the state of Minnesota. So some districts didn't have all, while so many had none. And it isn't just about a rural or a greater Minnesota urban divide. The fact of the matter is, it is a inner city versus suburban divide. It is about rural communities and what's happening in some of this. You go out to Wayzata High School right now, and God love it, but it is palatial. I mean, there are schools right now that have climbing walls, while there are other schools that don't have basic materials in their classrooms, and that is just wrong. Destiny cannot be determined by your zip code. And when you have kids that are going to schools that are inadequate and substandard, we can never allow that. So we need to invest, and we need to continue to do some of the things that have been outlined here. But I also think we need to remember, the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation almost 70 years ago said that education is something that happens not just in the classroom, not just between September and June. It is something that happens all day, every day, in classrooms and out of classrooms, during the course of the summer and on weekends. And we need to build communities that support education and support what happens in the classroom. And when we do that, we will have the first-class education system we need.
All right, well, I love that this young lady is standing up for herself. I love that. Thank you. So I have 3 children who all went to public schools. I am very devoted to public schools. I think that this is an institution that has held us together and continues to hold us together. So properly funding our public schools is not only an issue about the economy of every different location in the state, because who wants, as somebody said, who wants to move to and live in a community where there aren't good schools, but it's also an equity, and it's also in our Constitution. I just happen to be carrying my Minnesota Constitution around with me. Who knew? And you know, you could all read this. It's Article 3, Section 1, and it specifically says that it's the duty of the legislature to establish a general and uniform system of public schools. That's right in our Minnesota Constitution. But what's been happening is a number of things. First of all, the Minnesota Miracle, what that did was take the school funding off of the property tax and put it on the general tax. Because there's uneven property tax wealth across the state, and gradually that has eroded, and now it's more on the property tax, which gives you these inequalities that my colleagues here have been talking about. So we need to fix that. We need to go back more towards state funding and not property tax funding, which is so unfair in so many ways. The other thing that we need to do, our budget, our state budget is rigged. The way we do our state budgeting. It's rigged so that it looks like inflation doesn't exist. And this hurts our schools most of all, because our schools are a big part of our budget. And if you pretend inflation doesn't exist, it's really easy to give big tax cuts. You think you've got extra money when the schools are underfunded. So this is something we absolutely have to fix. The other thing we have to do is tell taxpayers where their money is going. We do a poor job of that in this state. Thank you.
We've now done a full round of questions with each of the candidates going first, and I realize you guys are getting a bit ornery now, but if there's no objection, I suggest that we just continue with the same order. Is that fair? So this question, Representative Murphy will be the first to answer. We've had a number of questions submitted today about electoral reform. Specifically, our community here has expressed concern about campaign finance reform, ranked choice voting, and a potential holiday for people to vote. More generally, what will you do to invigorate our civic culture?
I always like to confess that I love politics. I do. I grew up in a family that loved to talk about politics, and as a young person, they taught me about the power of it and the importance of it. And I have practiced that all through my life. Going to work early in Minnesota as a young nurse, working in campaigns, and recognizing that we together are the solution to the entrenched power that we're experiencing, either in the workplace or in our civic debate. So as your governor, I will continue to do what I have been doing for the last 11 years. Which is spending my time not just in the district I represent. And the first time I ran for office, I was not an awesome candidate. I didn't realize that my job was to listen. And I started door knocking in December before that November election. I knocked the heck out of my district, and I learned everything I needed to know to represent the people there through that experience of talking to Minnesotans. And if you give them space, they will tell you what it is that you need to do as a leader and as a representative for that area. We have real pressure pushing us away from the ballot box in Minnesota. I know that each of the Republican candidates for governor are standing up and saying they would like to pursue voter ID, which is voter suppression. We have to fight that. In this last session, Governor Dayton signed an education bill that in the end allows educators to teach without a license for many years, which is a backdoor way of undermining Education Minnesota, the Union for Teachers. It's union busting, which is another pillar of our democratic process. We have to make sure that we are disclosing the dark money that's coming into our politics. And when I was the majority leader with Paul Thissen as the speaker, we tried to pass that, and the NRA was the biggest opponent to that. We have to keep the reins of our politics in our hands. We must do that. We have to hold on to them by participating. We need to make sure that our redistricting process is fair and is held to the people. We have to make sure that we are participating in our campaigns. And I will continue to show Minnesotans that we have the power within ourselves to set our course using the tool of politics. Thank you, Brittany.
When I first went to Congress and came back after the first term, somebody asked me, what did you learn doing that? Going from the high school classroom, never been in the Capitol, all of a sudden you're in the United States Congress. I said, well, I learned to say, don't ever say it can't get worse, because it will. But what I really learned was, and this as a high school government and geography teacher, was the two fundamental problems in our democracy right now are gerrymandered redistricting and campaign finance. Everything else will stem from those, probably in that order. So as governor of Minnesota, I would, when we're trying to fight federally, and it'll probably take a constitutional amendment to do so, Citizens United and full disclosure of campaign finance reform is a good start. Encouraging and making sure, this idea of what they're doing federally on voter suppression, we need to make sure as they allow the Voting Rights Act, the 1965 Voting Rights Act to expire, we in the states are going to have to take ownership for this. Absolutely, as someone suggested, I do not know why we're voting on that Tuesday in November, why we're not voting on Saturday as a holiday and having everyone there, why we're not making sure everyone who goes in at 18 for one way or another or redoes their driver's license is registered to vote. We need to encourage that. We need to make sure and watch very carefully. This redistricting case that's in front of the Supreme Court in Wisconsin could make a big deal. That's another reason why this 2018 governor's race is so important. We're going to lose a congressional seat because of declining populations, but how these seats are drawn are going to shape this. As your governor of Minnesota, my pledge to you will be, I will not draw districts to favor Democrats. I will draw districts that make sure, as the legislature does it together, to make sure that they're fair for our democracy. Those are the things where Minnesota can lead on. Making sure we have full disclosure of campaign finance, making sure that we have it easier and make it easier for all people to vote, making sure that we're there and in the idea that encouraging that and asking people makes us stronger. That's what we're looking for. Those are the things that can happen. But this, and I'm telling you, I know it's nothing new in here and it's preaching to the choir, this is the biggest threat to our democracy. This Supreme Court case that is going forward on redistricting. I'll tell you the story. I had someone take a photo with us. He won't even take photos with Democrats because he's afraid he'll get primary from that. That's how broken your Congress is, and that's what we need to fix.
Well, I think this is obviously a very serious issue, but I do think that we as Minnesotans should step back a little bit and be proud of the record that we have here. One of the highest voter turnouts, if not the highest voter, year after year after year, and it's still too low, 75% in presidential years. But the fact of the matter is we've always had relatively clean politics in the state of Minnesota. Money is absolutely corrupting our political system. Citizens United has to be overturned, either via constitutional amendment or a president that puts a Supreme Court that understands what democracy is all about. We need to make sure that our redistricting systems are fair, and Minnesota actually has had a fairly, our districts are relatively fair districts, and we have a tradition of that. You go to a place like Texas, Austin looks like a pie, because they have made sure that Austin, one of the most liberal cities in the country, has absolutely no Democrats elected out of Austin, Texas. But we need to continue to fight, and we need to be diligent. But we saw the example of what can happen in politics this week in the city of St. Paul. A mayoral candidate who was a victim of a burglary in his house was subject to some of the most vile independent expenditure literature I have ever seen. It was racist, it was racist, it was racist. And the fact of the matter is, people unfortunately think that that's what politics is coming to nowadays, that people can just throw out anything that they want. When people stand up, though, as we have in the city of St. Paul, and said, this is not acceptable, this is not who we are, we can fight back against those things. We have to call it for what we see it. Minnesota should be very proud of our record, but it is not something that we can take for granted. We need to continually fight. Ranked choice voting is one possibility. We're going to see in the elections both in Minneapolis and St. Paul whether that truly helps bring people out and changes the dynamic of the political debate. I'm not sure that that's the right answer. To me, it's still kind of a test, but it certainly is at least one idea to get people to be a part of the democratic process that might not otherwise be.
Okay, well, this is really a great question. So I think a lot of times when Democrats have the reins of power, we really fail to use it. And one of the reasons that I'm running is that I think we need to be very clear about what we're for. Sure, there are some things where we can get to a win-win and get everybody to agree. This is an area, though, where that's pretty difficult because there aren't two reasonable sides. The sides here are those people who want Minnesotans to vote and those who want to restrict the right to vote and control and pick their voters instead of having the voters pick their leaders. So this is something where I think Governor Dayton kind of made a mistake early on because he said, I'm not going to sign anything unless it's got bipartisan support. Well, when one side isn't really interested in solving the problem, that's not a good position to take. So we have to be very clear about what we're for. Another piece of this answer is that we have to hold ourselves accountable. Because if we don't, Minnesotans don't believe us when we say what we're for. Because we're not applying the rules to ourselves. So this comes about in a couple of ways. One is we've got to crack down on junkets that are for legislators and other people and people in the administration that are paid for by outside interests that are not transparent to the public. Junkets, I bet you didn't even know this was happening. We've got to strengthen our gift ban. And we've got to strengthen our conflict of interest policies because none of us believe that we're subject to conflict of interest. But guess what? Everybody is because we're human beings. We need to make sure we've got strong policies that can give people confidence that politicians are for them and not for the people that have all the lobbyists at the Capitol and that are giving the money behind the scenes. So this is a super important question. It's one that is central to everything we're doing.
Well, this is a great one to go last on because I agree with everything that people have said so far. We actually do need, absolutely need redistricting reform. We should have a constitutional amendment that puts that out of the hands of the legislators and the partisan folks and puts it in the hand of a nonpartisan body. We should have campaign finance reform, absolutely. What Erin said is exactly right. We have tried over and over again and run up to special interests, including, most importantly, the National Rifle Association, who resists campaign finance reform over and over again. We should have all 18-year-olds and all new citizens registered to vote right away. If they want to opt out, they can, but they should be registered to vote right away. We should get felons, restore the right to vote for felons who have served their time so that they can get back into our communities. We should teach civics in our schools again. This is a big problem, that people don't understand what the process is. We need to up the game on that. We also, though, need to restore trust in our government. One of the things that I've been fighting for the last several years, and that we need to do much better, is the absolute lack of transparency we have in our state government. We make every city, every school board, we make the governor's office comply with the Data Practices Act and the open meeting law. We exempt the legislature. We need to make sure all of our meetings are open. It's ridiculous that we get bills with 20 minutes, 30 minutes that are 80, 90, 100 pages long that we have to vote on, that you don't know what's in them and we don't know what's in them. We need to change all those rules. And I've said if I'm elected governor, I will veto any bill, even if I agree with it, if it doesn't follow basic common sense transparency rules so everybody knows what's in those bills. Everybody knows what their legislators and their governor is talking about. At the end of the day, though, all of these changes aren't going to make a difference if we don't give people a reason to vote. We need to be bold about what we stand for as Democrats so they make sure that they come out to vote and they see that it will make a difference in their lives. When we passed marriage equality, one of the things that made me choked up as I called that vote was the fact that there were people outside, thousands of people outside the walls of that chamber that made that happen. We need to get back to a politics that's about governing with people instead of for people again. And if we do that, people will show up to vote. And that's the most important thing we can do.
A number of people have expressed interest in questions of, President Murphy, have you done something yet? You did, right? Sorry about that. A number of people have expressed interest.
You're doing a great job.
expressed interesting questions about transportation. One way to make that question less abstract and more local is to ask you specifically, why didn't the North Star rail line get expanded to St. Cloud? Do you support extending it now? Congressman Walz.
Yeah, this one stayed, but in full disclosure to all the state folks, especially working in the legislature, their hands are tied because of federally the inability to move a really robust transportation package. It's something that I have fought for, something all of us know about. When you go out and talk to people, again, I think there's been some really great points. Tina's point about letting people know where their tax dollars are going to go, that's a very, very important statement, because there's a lot of folks out there, they say, well, they will label us as tax and spend liberals. Okay, fine. So in Congress, they don't pass anything on transportation. That costs taxpayers $110 billion a year to do nothing in deteriorating roads and what's called idling tax. So making the case of where transportation is in our best interest, it's an absolute function of government. The federal government must pass that robust bill. But here, this gives us an opportunity. The reason in North Star Rail and expanding it out, and transit, and local interest in these things, Republicans have done a masterful job of splitting us economically, Greater Minnesota versus the Twin Cities. One of the ways they did that was by telling people in my district in southern Minnesota, the reason that Highway 14 is not a 4-lane highway all the way from New Ulm to Rochester is because of these transit projects in the cities. They're taking away money from them. And they've successfully turned people away from a basic investment that as Minneapolis goes, so goes New Ulm. As Worthington goes, so goes St. Paul, and so forth. So here, all of us, I think, have stood up, and they will ask you this. You have the courage to say, we need to fund transportation. If that means a gas tax, so be it. It's a regressive tax. It hits those least able to afford it to pay it. But we have to start coming up with a plan to do that. Infrastructure bank, ways to do these things. And transit is one piece of multimodal. We have a wonderful highway in the Mississippi River. But it is under risk because we're not investing federally in the locks and dams. We need to use all of our resources, and the state of Minnesota needs to lead on it. Transit and transportation is the fundamental driver with the economy. So we need to have the courage to say, fund it.
To the specifics of why it didn't come up to St. Cloud, I believe it was because the Republicans that represented the area refused to support the additional resources that would have been required. Our representatives, I think, could do a better job of explaining that. But we do need to expand it to St. Cloud, and we need to expand investment in all modes of transportation. It isn't just about bridges, it's not just about roads, it's about all modes of transportation that make a community vibrant and vital. And if we have to raise the gas tax, absolutely we should do that. But we need to have a diverse revenue stream. Counties have to have the ability to impose sales tax or wheelage tax in order to build out what they need in their counties. And we've seen what happens when you invest in those things. The light rail line between downtown St. Paul and downtown Minneapolis, the Green Line, has spurred economic development up and down that corridor. But more importantly, it has allowed people that were transit dependent to get to jobs, to get to education, to get to their kids' schools. And the fact of the matter is, communities that are investing in transportation in a truly multimodal network are communities that are growing. And when you don't invest in those things, you fall backwards. Look at Amazon. Look at the criteria that they put forward as they were looking for communities that they wanted to put 50,000 jobs in their second headquarters. They were communities that were investing in things like that make a vibrant community, including transportation. One of the very specific criteria. And so if Minnesota wants to compete with other states, with other countries, then we're going to have to continue to invest in these things. And we need to be honest about what it costs to do that. I think the Republicans keep on telling us that they're willing to invest in transportation, but they refuse to appropriate the resources to actually make it happen. That's not how the real world works. And I think the Democrats have always stood up and been very honest about the costs of government, not just in transportation, but in all sectors. And that's what we need to continue to do.
So there is a great myth out there that the Republicans like to put forward, that transit requires big subsidies, but roads are free. Right? They will tell us this all the time. I mean, they don't like to invest in anything where it isn't completely user paid, unless it's roads, where they just ignore that factor. So, you know, I think you've heard a lot here about what the reasons are, but the bottom line is that we have to recognize that we're all in this together, and having a strong transportation system with all roads and giving people ways to get to work and to shopping, that is a real basis of our economy. So I have a daughter in her 20s, she lived in the metro area for a while, and then she said, Mom, I don't want to live here anymore because it's too hard to get around. So these are the very people, we want our millennials to stay. That's a big thing that you hear people talk about. And when it's hard for them to get from here to there, they don't want to stay because a lot of them don't want to drive a car. And a lot of other people can't drive a car or can't afford a car. So I mean, this is really a critical thing that we've got to get our arms around and make sure that we have transportation across the state. And we do need to let people know what their dollars buy. And I've been saying this in a lot of places. We're very bad at this. When we fix a road, there should be a sign that says, thank you taxpayers, your dollars fixed this road. Or when we have a train, it should say, thank you taxpayers, your dollars are helping to support this train. And we don't do that. And so it lets Republicans get away with this myth that somehow, our dollars are being wasted. And maybe some of them are, I grant you that. But we use our dollars very well in Minnesota. We buy a lot of really good things. People just are allowed to not know what their government really does for them, and that allows Republicans to undermine government, something we have to stop.
Jim Knobloch. People have said exactly what is the right thing here, which is that we need to invest in our transportation infrastructure all across the state, both roads and bridges and transit. I mean, there's facts that we could be talking about much more than we do raising up, like the fact that the city of St. Cloud has won national awards for its transit system. And I was at an Isaiah meeting up in St. Cloud about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, where a man came and talked about, how important it was that he had bus service in that community so he could get to his job, but that the bus stopped at 9 p.m. And so he actually couldn't work the late shift because he couldn't figure out a way to get home. This doesn't just affect Minneapolis and St. Paul. This affects communities all across the state of Minnesota, and that's the argument that we need to keep making. And we need to be able to figure out how to build statewide coalitions, which is something that I've done for the last 6-7 years, and winning statewide coalitions that actually pass really important things for people. We're not going to get this transportation thing done unless we build that kind of a statewide coalition, and that's what I want to do. It also comes back to the issue that we just talked about before, if we want to talk about transit. How do you get millennials out to vote? What inspires them? Well, two things are really big. One is they want to get out of their car and they want to be able to get to work and to other things without having to get in their car. And secondly, they care about the climate, right? And if we don't move towards transit, if we don't rethink our transportation system, we can do everything in the world on the kind of energy system side. We're not going to tackle climate change, and we need to get up to that, and we need to make that argument much stronger than we have in the state. Let's also remember that it's not just about transportation infrastructure, though. Broadband, wastewater treatment, drinking water investments, capital investments, schools, $1 billion in underfunded school investment in this state. We need to make sure that we're making the argument that we need to invest in infrastructure all across the board. It creates jobs, it creates the pathway and the structure for our economy to boom, and if we don't stand up for that as Democrats, I don't know what we stand for.
Transportation matters to our daily lives, to our economy, and to our way of life in the state of Minnesota. My husband Joe is a painter. He's been painting houses since 1980, and years ago he stopped painting houses in the West Metro because it was too hard to get there and it cost their business too much. I met with the Chamber of Commerce head up in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, and he said to me, you need transit in the metro area because we can't get our trucks from point A to point B to deliver services, to deliver our goods, because the congestion is so intense there. And I know what it feels like when I'm leaving work to pick up my kids from childcare, and that panicky feeling when I can't get there. Transportation is important to our way of life. Yes, we need to dedicate funding to it. Yes, we need to finish North Star. Yes, let's invest in multimodal so people can get from point A to point B and to do it effectively and efficiently. But the thing that this one frustrates me the most about is we have lost I feel, our ambition as Minnesotans, in terms of getting what we need to get done, in terms of dreaming big and solving big problems. And if the legislature and our government can't do basic infrastructure after we promised to do it in an election, something's not working right. When I think about Minnesotans across the state of Minnesota, and I've talked with a lot of them, they are working hard every single day to make it go. And communities are working very hard every single day to make it go, and they are taking risks, and they are thinking big, and they're putting themselves into it. And that has been our tradition as Minnesotans, but I'm not seeing that right now in our politics. I'm not seeing that right now in our politics, and it's time for us together to say we want more than what is being delivered right now, a safe and tepid and technical politics, so we can get the basic things done, like building transportation that works for all of us, infrastructure, affordable health care, and great schools across the state of Minnesota. It takes big thinking. We can do that.
We only have time for one more question before closing statements. So we won't get to this one anonymously submitted question about how your campaigns are going to help local legislative candidates.
We need to have a governing majority, right? We need the next stateful governor to have a governing majority in the House.
Instead, I would like to ask you this question, please, as our last question, because I think it allows you a fair amount of degree of flexibility. What is one specific decision made by Governor Dayton during the last 4 years that you would have decided differently, and why? Mayor Coleman, you were first, please.
Geez, I always get the easy ones when I'm Thank you. Is it time to stop yet? Look, first of all, let me just start off by saying I think Governor Dayton has done a great job. I think he has a good job. He has stood tall when the Republicans have tried to dish the worst of what they stand for at him. Thank God he's an old goalie, because he stopped bill after bill after bill this last year that would have taken us in exactly the wrong direction. He has governed with his values. He has been very clear. He ran for office saying that he was going to raise the taxes on the wealthiest Minnesotans, and he did that, and it was extremely popular. And he continues to be popular because they know that Mark was never in it for himself. Mark has always been about service and about serving the people. There are some differences. I will tell you honestly, the one thing that early on, when the Republicans shut down state government, and the state workers were on strike, I thought that the governor was too willing to come back in at that time, because I think it set the tone where the Republicans got the idea that they could just run over Mark whenever they wanted to. And I know that that's a tough decision, because he was dealing with the lives of 30,000 employees that work for the state of Minnesota. He was dealing with families that were looking to go to state parks and enjoy the amenities during the 4th of July holiday season. I know that that was a difficult decision, and I know that he was up here in St. Cloud listening to state workers tell the horrors of being afraid that they were going to lose their houses. But I think sometimes we do have to stand strong when the Republicans are trying to run things down our throats that are not in the best interest of the future of the state of Minnesota. And I think you can count on me to stand strong to make sure that we are fighting for Minnesota values and Minnesota families.
So I actually have many more than one thing. I'm sorry. Of course, we have the tax bill that he should have just vetoed instead of signing it and then trying to blind item veto the legislators' funding. I think that was a critical mistake. He would have been in a much stronger situation to just veto that bill. We didn't have to have a tax bill. But there are also, he signed or allowed to become law a couple of health care bills that are now really, or actually 3 bills. One, the big budget bill, that's going to really throw us into deficit in the future and really impact health care in the state. But also he signed this bill that's allowing our HMOs now to use their accumulated reserves, which is our money, taxpayer money, and not use it for health care any longer. This was repealed by the Republicans and signed by Governor Dayton. He allowed for-profit insurance companies now to come into our state. This is moving in the wrong direction. I'm afraid he's actually going to be presiding over getting rid of Minnesota Care altogether, because he also signed this waiver that, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds here, but he signed this waiver that actually cuts money that's coming into the state for Minnesota Care. So honestly, I think that one of the reasons I'm running is we need a governor who can stand up for these things, who's not bullied or intimidated, and that's what I will do as your governor. I will not allow these things to be done.
Well, I worked very closely with Governor Dayton for the last 6 years, kind of both behind the scenes and out in public, and I know how deeply he cares and how strong a governor he has been in the face of really, really virulently bad Republican efforts who don't respect him or the office. And not because he hasn't done well, but because that's just what they've learned about government. So Governor Dayton has done an amazing job for this state, and we should all be eternally grateful for everything he has done. And I have seen him do it. I also know that you need to stand up to the Republicans based on that experience every single time down the road and push back all the time. And I have been doing that for the last 6 years, standing toe-to-toe with the Republicans, saying that what you're doing is wrong for the state of Minnesota, losing my temper sometimes because what they're doing is crazy, but also being there in the room and fighting back every step of the way. That's the experience we need in the next governor, because if you don't have that experience, you don't know what you're getting into. 2 things I would say. The first is the tax bill that he signed this last time, because it's going to send us into deficit. And we worked incredibly hard. My first 10 years, deficit after deficit after deficit, and we couldn't plan long-term, we couldn't plan for the future, we couldn't do great things. In 2013 and 14, when I was the speaker, we raised taxes in the top 2%. We moved our caucus to do that, which was the first time in a generation we actually raised general fund taxes in the state. We did that, we balanced the budget, we paid back $2 billion to the schools, we did all-day kindergarten, we did early childhood education for the first meaningful time in the state, we froze college tuitions, we passed the broadband program, we passed health care coverage that covered tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Minnesotans. You can balance a budget and you can make the investments you need to make. It allowed us to make investments in nursing homes. Those are the things you can do if you have the courage to stand up and actually balance the budget in the right way. When I was leader of the Democrats, not a single Republican tax bill passed, and that was because of a lot of the work that I did. Now we know what the impact is. The other thing that needs to get out more, I'm going to be a governor that gets out all across the state of Minnesota and engages Minnesotans, because that's how we make progressive change.
When I was first elected, Tim Walz was our governor. And at the end of every session, he liked to talk about what he accomplished by really denigrating the legislature. And I would sit at my desk at the end and listen to him and read the news stories about what he said as sort of a sporting event. I won, they lost. Thinking, why aren't we talking more about Minnesota and Minnesota's future? Because often that's what was being shortchanged as he took his effort to run for president out on us and our budget. Governor Dayton has been devoted to Minnesotans, and I will be too, as your next governor. And there are things that he has done that I don't necessarily agree with. But the advantage that I think that he has not taken full advantage of is his high approval rating with the people of Minnesota. He's introverted to my extrovert. I've spent my 11 years out in the state of Minnesota with the people of Minnesota since I have been elected. And he could build more power for the agenda that is important for our future by spending more time with the people of Minnesota, bringing his ideas and the people's pulpit to the people of Minnesota, and bringing that power of us back into the Capitol to make sure that we are moving as far as we can. Our agenda, an agenda that is about us and about our future. The job of the governor is a tough one, and I've spent a lot of time with him as well. I was the majority leader in 2013 and 14 when we passed that big agenda that Paul Thissen just described. I've watched Governor Dayton struggle with some of the hard decisions that he's had to make because of the impact on the people, whether it was around the government shutdown, making choices about bonding projects. Those decisions weigh heavily on him because he's a human being, and we want that in our leaders, to feel that human impact. As a nurse, I face tough decisions all the time. You don't get to walk away from a tough decision as a nurse. And the decisions we make with people impact people's lives on a very real basis. And that has been probably the hardest part of my work since I've been an adult, and it is the discipline that I bring to this job.
Well, this question is deep, and I think it might be getting a little more into hillbilly elegy territory about what's happening with us as a party. I always think very, very carefully about critiquing someone's decision when you're not in that context. you're not there at the time and you're not where things are at. That's probably especially true when you belong to the body that I belong to with Paul Ryan right now about critiquing someone else. But I would say it is really important about this, and I will make full disclosure on this. I have never run against other Democrats in my life. I have spent my time beating Republicans. I spent my time taking a message, expanding the playing field, and getting Republican votes at times. I understand what it takes to build those coalitions, and I think all of us need to be very clear. Governor Dayton put himself in those positions, and whether we agree or disagree, let's be very clear about this. Had we not had him, we would be Wisconsin. Had we not had him, we could have had worse things. So to make the case right now, I'll answer any questions straight up on this, but I will not, and I think it's fair, to critique someone in that. What I can tell you is there will be a difference in style as me as governor. There will be a different way of approaching the issues. There will be a different way of building those coalitions based on the idea that I do start out from the premise that we have shared values, that we love this state deeply, that we may have a different approach to that. I am not naive. I taught 4th grade, for God's sakes. I'm not I've spent time in the military, and I've watched decisions had to be made that impacted people significantly. I've worked with Republicans on some of the toughest issues of trying to get reforms on things where I at times questioned whether their heart was there. But when it comes to this idea of being quick to critique people on decisions they made in leadership positions, I think it goes at the heart that we are looking at politics more than trying to find the center of people's lives. So in answer to this question, you'll see a different governor, you'll see a different style, you'll see someone who will approach it differently, but I will not critique decisions that are made that people are in the arena making them.
So that brings to a close the formal question period. Now we have a minute apiece for closing statements, beginning with Representative Liebling.
So I don't know if I get a chance to tell you, I'm from Rochester. I'm in my 7th term. I turned a red district to blue. In fact, I'm the first DFLer who was elected in Olmsted County ever since people started running with partisan labels. And 40% of my district is still Republican. And so one of the reasons you may not know me as well is that I don't get to spend election time going around and helping wonderful candidates around the state. I have to run in my own district if I want to be sure that I get reelected. But it's taught me some things. I've done it as a bold progressive. It's taught me that just like Senator Paul Wellstone, you can be on the side of ordinary people. You can be clear about that. You don't have to pretend to be in the middle. You don't have to hold up your finger to see which way the wind is blowing. To have people respect you and vote for you even if they don't always agree with you. And I think that's what Paul Wellstone taught us, is that people loved him because he was authentic and he was for them. And that's the model for my career. Please go to my website, tinaliebling.com. I'd love to have your support.
We don't need to settle to win this election. And I think we need to be very clear about that. We need to stand up for our values, and we need to nominate someone that can go to the people of Minnesota with credibility and say, we can accomplish these bold ideas because you've done it. And that's the argument I want to make to you. I've been in the arena, I've stood up to the Republicans, I've held up bad stuff, but I've also been there to accomplish a lot of great things. When I was Speaker of the House, and we run through that, but even when Governor Pawlenty was the governor, I passed children's health care that got tens of thousands of Minnesotans health care. I've done that when I've been in the minority, I've done it in the majority. I can build statewide coalitions. We can talk all you want about building statewide coalitions. I've done it. The second thing I want to say is I am going to honor the DFL endorsement because the work that you all do to make this party go is critically important. I think it frankly is a slap in the face if you're not going to honor that endorsement. This is not about one individual becoming the governor. This is about our party moving forward, building a movement that can actually elect people, and not just the governor, but every one of these folks that is running for the legislature. I'm going to honor your endorsement. I've gotten this stuff done. I'd love to earn your support. Thank you.
I believe in a kind of politics that improves people's lives, and when we use it together, we can build a bright future for everybody in the state of Minnesota. That, of course, includes strong public schools, single-payer health care, jobs to support our families. It's time for us to take the next step and tackle climate change by building the renewable energy economy across the state of Minnesota. it is important to me that we put on the table the hard issue of racial disparities, recognizing that we do have bias within ourselves, structural racism in the state of Minnesota, and if we're not tackling that, we are not making sure everyone has got a real shot at opportunity. And let us know and recognize the tools of our democracy, they are under attack in the state of Minnesota and across this country, and if we let those go, so do we let go our ability together to build a bright future. I love politics. I believe in us. It is time for us to build a bright future that includes all of us in the state of Minnesota. I would love to earn your support, your vote, and your trust. It's time for trust again in our politics. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you for spending Sunday doing democracy. This is what it's all about. I could not be more grateful. I'm Tim Walz. I'm running for governor because I love this state and believe in it. I'm running for governor because I was that kid that watched a family struggle with medical bills and know what good programs can do for that. I'm running for governor because I had the best public school teachers who gave me the chance to achieve my dreams, and I've been in that classroom trying to do the same. And I'm running for governor because I believe it gives us an opportunity of one of only 10 rural Democrats left in America. Let me take our progressive message through every Legion Hall, through every corner of this state, standing firm for what we believe, with the idea that those most impacted by our policies must be at the table in the first place. Let me build those coalitions with my Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan. Let me take them there and tell people there is something to believe in. There's a politics that makes a difference. Understand that Aric was right. One of us will be standing next to the Republican and $50 million in Coke money. Make sure we're ready for that, because the real important race is November of next year. We must win this governor's race. Give me the opportunity to do that for you.
Well, thank you so much for being here. You know, Aric did start off by saying that you're looking at one of us is the next governor of the state of Minnesota, and I hope that that is true, because every one of the folks up on this panel, I hope I number myself among them, can lead the state forward in a tradition of progressive DFL politics. And every one of us will take us in a vastly different direction than the Republicans will take us if they get a hold of the governor's office. And we need to stand up and we need to fight on behalf of all Minnesotans. You don't have to guess how I'm going to govern as the governor of the state of Minnesota, because you can look at 12 years of a track record. 12 years of governing through a very difficult time, through the Great Recession, when 50% of the working men and women in the building trades were on the bench. And we went to work to make sure that we were putting jobs in the ground and getting people back to work. We built an out-of-school time network that has 20,000 kids participating in quality out-of-school times, extending the learning day. We worked on racial bias and racial equity to make sure that everyone that works for the city of St. Paul reflects the diversity of our community and works on behalf of everyone in our community. These are going to be difficult conversations going forward about the future of the state of Minnesota. But I've been there, I've led the fight, and I want to be your next governor. I'd love to have your support. Thank you so much.